Thank you, Rustam, for your introduction, and thank you all for coming. It's great to be back in France, even if you're virtually. And yeah, I'll be presenting this paper with co-authoring with Rustam and Maxime from Toulouse. I'll be talking about a very simple question that concerns social connectedness. So we will see a lot of networks here and the sharing of innovations. In particular, when I talk about innovation, talk about new profitable knowledge. So let's have some background for this talk. So if you look at the literature, the past literature in organizational industrial economics, then you see that a lot of attention has been paid to networks. So a lot of papers studying networks, and why so? Well, first of all, we know in general that networks are a powerful tool that would describe behavior, because we don't live in a vacuum. We live all in a more interconnected way, and our behavior depends on the behavior of others. But most importantly, networks not only describe the way we interact, but they also shape the incentives in strategic situations. So we know, for example, games applied on networks. We know that the network component, the network structure, would shape our behavior. And if you think of any example that in which, for example, you can use networks to study some phenomenon, one of these is growth and the flow of knowledge. So people in this literature of organizational industrial economics, and more generally, I will say in economics, are interested in networks because they describe the channels through which information flows, in which knowledge flows. And if we use the words by Abramovitz, we study a lot growth theory, and he said that communication technology can provide a new spur of opportunity to enhance the rates of introduction of technology change and productivity growth. So they're really important. And the overall message that I want to give you here is that networks are both tools that they're important for describing the flow of information, but at the same time they affect behavior because they make some actions more or less viable or costly. And if we look at the importance of network, well, they have been taken into account by policymakers. In particular, they focus on 2 points. And on one hand, they focus on the creation and establishment of long-lasting relationships among firms. So what they usually call network stability. In particular, I mean the networks, stable networks allow people, agents, to interact more often. For example, they tend to interact with the same partner, or they would enact a reciprocal sharing of information, because of course, long-lasting relationship allow reciprocity to emerge. And so we see that firms tend to have contracts with the same partners or interactions in general with the same group of firms. And on the other hand, we also know that policymakers have tried to improve or increase the number of connections and reduce the barriers that impede the flow of new knowledge. And this would, of course, increasing the firm connections would increase also the dissemination of knowledge, the way we broadcast the knowledge and networks, and therefore within a group of firms. And this also allow cumulative innovation to emerge. So we usually stand on the shoulders of giants. So we innovate thanks to the innovation of others. And of course, we have to gather knowledge to do so. We have some many examples here that the policymakers have tried to implement policies following these 2 lines. So one example is, of course, the industry clusters that you see around the world, like Silicon Valley, or even in France, we have the Pôle de Compétitivité across France, and then even in Asia, the Digital Media City in Seoul. So we have many examples and attempts from the government that even endogenously firms tend to form clusters of firms to improve these two sides, these two components that we have seen, the length of relationship and the number of relationships. But today I want to talk something, introduce you to something that is kind of new in this literature, which is the innovation sharing dilemma. So it's really important to share new knowledge, but very few people have considered this as a sort of dilemma. And the dilemma is the fact that sharing profitable knowledge is sometimes hard because there are costs and benefits that one should take into account. And as some authors have already highlighted, the sharing of innovations creates a tension between cooperative and competitive forces. So if you're a firm and you want to share some new knowledge, it can be innovation, a new product, and you're asking whether you want to share knowledge with your competitors or partners, you definitely do create by sharing some positive externalities, because you create positive spillovers to others. You pass on information that can be used for other production or for the creation of new products. At the same time, you're facing individual costs, which is the fact that you're losing on your competitive advantage. So there is this tension that is typical of collective action. For example, you can think of a public good game. You have this similar tension between cooperative and competitive force. And this will make it a sort of cooperative dilemma. And therefore, if we want to study this under the lens of cooperative cooperation dilemma, then we rely on the experimental evidence that we have out there on cooperation. What we know, according to also what policymakers are trying to do, is that first, repeat interaction will foster cooperation. So we have a strong literature from lab experiments showing that partner matching, the famous partner matching protocol, will sustain cooperation in repeated games like Prisoner's Dilemma or Public Goods Game. But also some authors have tried to implement partner matching versus stranger matching. So the fact that we change partners very often, so the length of interaction is really small. So they have tried to implement this on networks, and it works quite well because cooperation is sustained over time, but not time is needed here. So there are already some examples using Business Dilemma PGGs on networks, and they change the stability of networks, and therefore the matching protocol, they find that there's need time for cooperation to emerge. So on one hand, we know these the repeat interactions would foster cooperation, but at the same time, on the other hand, we don't know much about network connections. But what we know is that in large communities, groups, it's harder to sustain cooperation, and this is proven by many meta-analyses and also theoretical models that show that it's harder to cooperate and to sustain reciprocity, or in general to administer collective issues in large group communities. And in our specific case, you can think of the higher number of connection would increase the cost of sharing. So each firm has a higher cost of sharing if it has a higher number of connections, because it creates more positive spillovers to the competitors. Therefore, there is the detrimental for their competitive advantage. And also there is a small portion of literature that shows that in large groups, people believe that it's more likely also to meet free riders. That also add on the fact that a higher community group would be detrimental for cooperation. So with this in mind, we design an experiment and we want to answer to this very simple question. So first of all, apart from the fact that we want to understand whether partner matching would foster the sharing of innovation that we see as an act of cooperation, we also want to understand whether the interplay between repeated interactions and network connectivity has an effect on the sharing of innovations. So our question is whether, on the one hand, we can increase the sharing of innovations by making the length of interactions longer, by establishing longer contracts, for example, or making firms interact more often. But at the same time, we believe that increasing the number of connections, therefore your small community in this network, will be detrimental for the sharing innovation. So we see this as a negative interplay between these two factors that policymakers are trying to manipulate and increase on the market. And therefore, you can easily understand that to do so, we need a lab experiment. It's hard to do this in the real life, so we will need to manipulate and vary these variables in the lab. And also in the real networks, usually connectivity, so the number of networks, the neighbors that you have, co-varies with the population size. We keep the same population, but we change the number of connections. So that's really important, because in real life, there is a confounder usually. You cannot always keep the population size the same and change the density or the connectivity of the network. So what we do in this work, we will show you a new paradigm that we call the sharing dilemma to recreate this environment that mimics, the sharing dilemma, the tension between cooperative and competitive forces. The four subjects are wired into a network, and they can interact only with their assigned counterparts. And what we change is the matching protocol and the network connectivity. So we will implement in some treatments in our between subject design, stranger and partner matching. And for each of them, we change the connectivity. So we have 2 neighbors for each subject versus 4 neighborhoods. And this is a graphic design, our experimental design. So we have, I will call you in what follows, the stranger networks with S at the beginning, and the number that follows indicates the connections that each subject has. So I will refer to stranger with 2 connections as 2, and we have also as 4. So stranger with 4 connections. And of course, as you may guess, in stranger, partners change every round. So you're reshuffled on the network in a different position with potentially different neighbors in each round. And we also have partner with 2, partner with 4 neighbors. So this is our experimental design. And if I can proceed, if there are no other questions that I have to address now, I can show you the paradigm. So the first task that people and subjects in our experiment perform is this new task that we invented from scratch, in which there is a combinatorial task. So subjects have 60 seconds to choose 3 among the 16 items that you can see here on the shelves. And they're told that they have to make some innovations by combining these items. There are many combinations that they can do, and they have to put effort to find a combination that, of course, lead the higher payoff. Payoffs are not known in advance, so it's a really they have to explore this unknown landscape by making different combinations. Also, items change in each round, and our intention, our goal here in this task is to make them do a sort of a real effort task and to find innovations. So they will combine these objects and at some point finding some innovations. But let's see how what's in the backstage of this task. So when they choose each triad in each round, so they can only choose one triad in each round, they receive a score for that round. Scores are pre-assigned, so they for each possible triad we have already distribution of defined a priori of scores. There are combinations that give higher scores, other combinations that give lower scores. This is a very simple normal distribution with a unique global maximum. And whenever they choose a triad, this is their payoff function. So for each triad there is a score, and this score is plugged into a function, very simple function, in which you have the score multiplied by m, which is a multiplicator. That multiplicator represents technology of the firm. Okay, so whenever you make your decision, so you find your triad, then you receive a score, and your final score is the multiplication between the score of that triad and m. And everyone starts with a very simple m of 1. So everyone starts the same with the simplest technology. But how can technology be improved in this task? So we know that innovation can improve the technology of the firm, and each firm can find some innovations, and these innovations are represented here by, well, new ingredients that they can add or they can make future combination, future triads, so the three products they can combine, more efficient. So what we do basically is that they can find there is a 40% probability that a triad will give you an innovation. The innovation will increase the m, the multiplicator here in your score function. So every time you find innovation, you have a sort of technological shock. And so there is a fixed probability in each round. It's the same across rounds, doesn't change, doesn't depend on previous rounds. Whenever they find innovation, the m, the multiplicator, increases. And once they find an innovation, each agent, the innovator has to decide whether to share it or not. So this is the screen that they see. That's in French, and it says, "Well, congratulations, you have found an innovation. Well, bonus ingredients in this case. Do you want to share it with your partners that you're connected with?" So of course, before starting the game, they have an understanding quiz in which they understand they are connected in a network with 2 or 4 subjects and so on and so forth. So we made sure that they do understand what's going on in this pyramid. So after this decision, they're shown their own payoff. Well, if they don't find the innovation, they go directly to the feedback. And what we show here, and then what they also told in the instructions, that they accrued some score throughout rounds, and that depends on the score that they find for each of this triad. And they also have to compete with each other by because we make a final ranking. So they are all classified, they're all ranked in a final rank. And at the end of the experiment, they have an extra gain, an extra score that depends on the ranking. So for example, if you're at the first, you receive more than a half of the score that you have accrued throughout the experiment. Well, if you're the last in this ranking, you receive no extra bonus. So there are two components that are important for your subject's payoff. One is the nominal score that they accrue. So, for example, how many points you have accumulated during the rounds. On the other hand, they have to take into account that at the end of the experiment, there will be a final ranking. So they have to compete with each other. And that makes this recreates the tension between cooperation and competition. And then the final feedback. So once they have done the task, decide whether to share innovation if they found innovation, and receive their feedback in terms of score. Now they receive the feedback in terms of others' actions. So in this last screen, they are shown whether, they are reminded the number of connections and then whether they are matched with the same or different partners or counterparts. And they also are informed of the number of sharing decisions, a number of ingredients, innovations that the counterparts have found, and their decision whether these have shared or not. So, for example, here in this screen, you see that you're reminded that you're matched with the same two partners. So this is a partner matching, and among them, both, so all of them, the two of them have found innovations, and only one among them has decided to share. So you have a 50% sharing in your neighborhood. And this works every round. Even if you don't find innovation, you're always informed about the actions of your counterparts. Wrap up. So you have combinatorial task at the beginning. You have the score that you obtain, and the decision. If you find innovation, you have to make a decision whether to share it or not. Well, if you found it, then you make the sharing decision. Otherwise, you go directly to the peer feedback, which informs you the actions of your counterparts, and these starts over. So they go around this pattern for 30 rounds. And the experimental design, you have some additional details to tell you. For example, once received innovations cannot be transferred to third parties. So we only allowed one run of sharing. Otherwise, it would be kind of hard to decide whether the number of sharings and the late game length would be also really long. So we decide only to share innovations with your closest partners. They cannot be reshared over. And so subjects are not aware of the total network size, as it is usual in these experiments. So we run sessions with more subjects than the network size. And the size of the network is 15 subjects, as usually in standard sessions, so probably good game. The length of the round is 30. So this would allow us to have at least 12 sharing decisions, because as you remember, the sharing decisions depends on the probability of finding innovations. So there will be a 30% chances to find innovation. On average, we have 12 sharing decisions for each person, each subject. And also 30 rounds is something that we agreed with the other collaborators, because we saw that from other experiments of networks, cooperation needs time to emerge. And that's actually what happens then when we jump into the results section. And also in the last round, we want to check whether across the different networks, behavior is different. So we allowed players, players were given an innovation in the last round to study the final behavior. And we also chose connectivity, well, we're interested in connectivity. There are many other aspects of networks, of course, but that's the simplest first. It also recreates more what policymakers have in mind. And also we decide 2 and 4, because these are intermediate level of connectivity, and that's also bearable information for subjects. It's easy for the lab, as you may guess, have a large number of connections in the lab. It's kind of complicated. And with the network size, we have to come to terms, define a intermediate level, a good level of connectivity. And also, we didn't want to to throw information to subjects by assuming that they have a lot of neighbors. Okay. We then formulate this hypothesis. They are all pre-registered and available on SF, as well as the material for the study. And as I mentioned before, we're interested in comparing, studying the effect of partner matching protocols relative to stranger matching protocol in this new paradigm. So we assume that partner matching promotes higher sharing rates. And to do so, we compare partner networks, so P, these in blue, against stranger networks. We don't do this because we use the stranger network as a sort of control baseline for each of these networks. But we are also interested in the interplay between connectivity and partner matching, the beneficial effect of partner matching. So we will do a sort of diff and diff by comparing the beneficial effect of repeat interactions when network connectivity is equal to 2 relative to the beneficial effect of partner matching when the connectivity is equal to 4. So we always have this control, which is the stranger matching, that would allow us to compare the effect of the interplay between partner matching protocol and the connectivity. So if there is no other question or anything else, I can proceed. Rustam, is there something?
Maybe you can say a few words about the fact that innovations are completely random.
Okay.
And why did that?
So, okay, the innovation task, as I told you before, is they change over across rounds. So we didn't want, first of all, subjects to find innovation based on their cognitive ability, for example. So we didn't want to have these confounders in our study. Second, our main point here is to make them do some effort to find some innovations. So that was our first concern. Secondly, this will create some possible confounders in the sense that, well, if we don't allow, for example, innovations to be random, then they will follow a path. Like you can build innovations, for example, based on what you've done in the past, and this will create sort of autocorrelation, let's say, or innovation. The probability of sharing innovation depends on the number of innovation that you find, which in turns depend on your abilities or other factors that affect your ability to find innovations. So the main point here is to have a task at the beginning in which they are engaged, first of all. They can find sort of, after putting some effort, an innovation, and then we focus only on the innovation sharing. Otherwise, just saying that, okay, that's innovation, you received an innovation, or you found innovation by pressing a button, this is not really effort demanding, and also that doesn't recreate the paradigm that we want to find here, we want to recreate here. So that's if this addresses the concerns, that then I can proceed.
Thanks.
Then we will, of course, discuss that. Okay, so the two hypotheses that we have, And yes, the sample. So we for the moment we have 5 sessions almost for each of these networks, and sessions were run in Dijon with students. With 30 students in each session, they were split into different networks. We made sure that they understood the instructions before proceeding to the experiment. On average, they play for 40 minutes. And okay, then I first present some general results, and then I go into details on a more thorough analysis of sharing rates over rounds. So overall, we find that when we gather and pull together a partner and stranger, irrespective of their connectivity, we found that there is a higher sharing rates in partner matching relative to stranger matching. And this is also confirmed by our analysis using multi-level models, and then we find modest evidence of higher sharing rates under partner matching, and the effect is significant under 10% level. But when we break down the effect, the sharing rates by treatment, so also by connectivity, then we find that P2, so the partner with 2 connections for each agent treatment, drives the results here. So we find that this treatment is significantly different from all the others, and we don't find any big difference with the others using simple pairwise tests. But by using our regression models to compare and to test also our first hypothesis, they will say partner matching protocols who foster the sharing innovation, we find results only for less connected networks. So what we find here is that by comparing partner 2 with stranger with 2, we find here there's not much difference. Sorry, there's no the evidence is not significant at 10%, not even here. But when we look at the time, then we will see that there is a higher difference. So at the overall level, when we implement the model, there is no difference despite the evidence by pairwise tests. It's also confirmed by the CDF plots. But what I want to show you is that operation needs time to evolve and to emerge compared to the other treatments, the stranger treatments. And what we find here is that there is a stable patterns in partner matching relative stranger. So if we don't find overall, without taking into account time, a big difference in cooperation, when we consider time, we see some nice insights. And what we find is that partner matching has more stable and higher cooperation than stranger matching. So we find a difference that evolves, that widens over time. And this, in the last round, there is a higher estimated probability of sharing in partner matching relative to stranger matching. So the main message here is that overall we don't find a big difference, but this difference needs time. When indeed in our analysis, when we consider the effect of time, and we have the analysis robust for autocorrelation, because maybe someone can say that there is a serial correlation over time, then we also control for that and the results are robust to that. And so the main message is that partner matching needs time to be different relative to stranger matching. So cooperation in stranger matching decays over time, while it remains stable in partner matching. If we break down the partners by treatment, then we see then other insights. For example, we see that the most of the effect that we find in partner versus stranger is still driven by our partner and less connected networks. So what we see here is that there is a pronounced difference that widens and becomes more pronounced in terms of sharing rates under, in this panel on the left, under less connected networks when we compare partner and stranger, but this is not the case for more connected networks, so 4, when we compare partner and stranger. In the last round, we found a higher percent of probability of sharing under partner, and that's significant to many extent. And but this is not significant when we compare partner and stranger in networks that are more connected. So we have some evidence here for that connectivity plays a detrimental role as we were formulating our second hypothesis. But we look more into details by using mixed FET models. What we see here is that, again, partner stranger with 2 connections are not different overall, but when we include time, they do become different. So cooperation to emerge and to be different between these 2 networks, partner with 2 and stranger with 2 neighbors, in its time. And only at the end we see a bigger difference. And these results are also robust to serial correlation. A different picture instead we have when we compare partner and stranger with 4. So we don't see any difference or any robust difference, not even over time. So the gap between partner and stranger never happens, not even at the end of the rounds, at the end of the game. So overall, summarize these 2 pieces of results. First, we find as a point to our hypothesis, the partner matching has is characterized and fosters higher rates of innovations, of sharing. And we saw that this pattern is stable over time, whereas in stranger, this decay. And the interplay between connectivity and matching, well, we know that less connected networks display higher sharing rates, as we have seen when connections are low, for example, 2, and the benefits of repeat interactions decreases under highly connected networks. So such an effect that we find in less connected networks, however, needs time to emerge. But I wanted to give you also more details into the behavior of subjects. So these were our 2 hypotheses, and we have provided evidence in support for that. But we also want to show 2 last pieces before concluding, and this will concern what's going on in the background, in the backstage of this experiment. So we know that in partner matching, there is a higher sharing of information of innovations, and there's also especially a higher and peculiar of less connected networks. Indeed, we find consistently with our results that people tend to receive more bonuses and therefore share more bonuses under less connected networks, P2, relative to the others. And we don't find any substantial difference between P4 and S4. So as I told you before, there is more reciprocity under less connected networks, and whereas higher connected networks. And here, for example, we see from our analysis that receiving a bonus, receiving an innovation in a given round increases the probability of sharing future innovations in subsequent rounds. But this only works for less connected networks. When we talk about more connected networks or stranger matching networks, it doesn't work. It even decreases the probability of sharing future innovations. This, of course, reflects also in terms of efficiency. But what interesting, what we find is that we do find a difference in efficiency at the connectivity level. So when we put together networks of 2 and networks of 4, we find a difference in efficiency levels. But when we break down by treatments, there is no difference. So we think that this is due to the fact that the lateness in the emergence of difference between treatments, for example, the fact that for cooperation to emerge in its time, this is not enough to reflect into higher efficiency levels. But comments are welcome, of course, and then we are still working on that. So that's we welcome new insights for this. And okay, to wrap up, so we saw that beneficial effect of repeated encounters are conditional on network connectivity. In our experiments, we report a significant increase in sharing rates only when the connectivity is low. And this effect seems to emerge over repetitions. This is not the first case. We also know other experiments on networks that show that it takes time for cooperation to emerge. And also, we've seen that sharing rates decline under stranger matching, while they remain pretty much stable under partner matching. And this is really supported by reciprocal exchanges. Therefore, higher connectivity has a detrimental effect also on efficiency, and yet we don't find any higher efficiency in partner matching relative to stranger matching when we compare the networks breaking down by treatments. So thank you all for your attention, and please, if you have questions, I'll be glad to answer. Thank you.